All right. Well, happy Tuesday, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Mary Price. I'm the Events and Marketing Director at the Shingo Institute at Utah State University, and I'm thrilled to kick off the session with you. I have two amazing colleagues with me today, Brittany Ogden and Shaun Barker, who oversee the assessment process at the Shingo Institute. And they're going to be talking about the Shingo Challenge today. And I'm going to drop a link in the chat for you to refer to for today's session. It's a box link to the Shingo Guidelines, and they'll be an excellent resource for you as you prepare your organization to challenge. Shaun and Britt, thanks so much for being with us today, and I'll turn the time over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mary. Appreciate that. All right, we'll just go ahead and jump in. In this webinar, Shaun and I will be discussing the Shingo Challenge with a focus on eligibility and the results documentation requirements. I've included our emails in the last slide. So if you have any questions and we don't get to them today, that you can just email either one of us directly. Thank you, Mary, for putting the guidelines in the chat. This is such an important resource to our applicants. It has so many different things in it. So if you have not already, we encourage you to download and review the Shingo Guidelines. They are available on our website. You can scan this QR code, and then they are also in the chat. Everything we're discussing will be outlined in the guidelines. And since our time on this webinar is limited, we'll expect that you'll have additional questions. So be happy to email either one of us, and we can coordinate a meeting to go over those questions. In the guidelines, you will find this on page 8 and 9. This is our process at a glance. It's an overview of the challenge process and a visual that we designed to kind of give you a clear picture of what to expect from start to finish as you go through the Shingo Challenge. For today's webinar, we'll just be focusing specifically on that eligibility portion right there at the top. And I'll go ahead and turn the time over to Shaun to start in.
So as we discuss the eligibility process, I mean, this is one of the first things organizations come to discuss with us is what's our applying entity going to be? What does it look like? How do we really prepare to challenge? Because usually it's a part of the organization. It's not an enterprise as a whole. So there can be several things involved here, and we're going to walk through about a dozen of them, hopefully leaving some time at the end where Brittany and I can answer some questions. Although keep in mind, Brittany always says I talk too much, so we may have time, we may not. We'll see how this goes. So let's first talk about industry eligibility. Most industries are welcome, including services, manufacturing, healthcare, education, all of these. However, there are potential conflicts of interest that should be discussed with the Institute when there's the potential for them. And some of these will come up occasionally. Just an example is if the organization is teaching or offering the same types of offering that we are, that's probably going to be a conflict of interest for us, and that won't be eligible to apply. But there are some other things that come up occasionally. So just have that conversation with us early on as you're thinking about how we're going to structure this. We have organizations talk with us up to 2 years in advance of the time that they want to challenge. That's perfect. Gives us time to really work through the process and make it nice and smooth as the organization goes through. Ownership structure. Applicants must have the same ownership throughout the entire challenging entity, right, across that organization. If they're two separate entities that have joint ownership, they need to really challenge separately in that case. Now, this again, it merits a lot of discussion because there's going to be some questions about this. For example, if there is If it's one organization that functions and it's owned by many, there can be many different cases on this. So again, please discuss this with us beforehand. Transformation journey. We're looking for organizations that have got at least 3 years of a transformation journey. And this becomes really important when we begin to look at metrics, and we're going to cover that a little bit later in this webinar. But as we look at those, we want to make sure that the organization has had time to really see some of the benefits of a transformation, because that will show up in the measures, and that usually takes a few years for that to happen. So 3 years of transformation. So some organizations have been around for 20 years and started their transformation 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Great. Some have been around 20 years and have just begun to start that kind of cultural transformation, lean transformation, operational excellence, whatever it's called within the organization. So keep that in mind. Legal standing. Organizations shouldn't be under any kind of investigation for misconduct that would make them ineligible to challenge. That's important, because that would be a distraction from the challenge. Financial stability. Applicants shouldn't be under bankruptcy or considering it. Now, in some cases, the part that's challenging of the organization does not know some of these things are going to happen. We understand that, but we will discuss that as we talk about eligibility and as organizations prepare to challenge. So keep those in mind. Stability, major restructuring, such as divestitures, or all of these things, whether it's legal standing, financial stability, or organizational stability, they can all be a distraction from the challenge. So we want to make sure that we don't have any of those that are happening, or at least to the best of our knowledge, they are not going to happen. Social and environmental responsibility. There are some industries that it's very difficult to avoid harm, for example, to the environment, right? Well, we want to make sure that in those cases that the impact, where the impact is unavoidable, that there's a clear plan on how to mitigate and repair it after we have done that. A good case in point is mining. In a lot of cases, we have to dig up the ground, get the material, those types of things, right? We want to make sure that there's a plan afterwards. How do we bring that back to repair, and those type of things would be heavily looked at. Entity-specific metrics. This is one that Brittany and I come up against all the time, and we talk about this extensively when we're looking at eligibility. The metrics that are presented for the challenge must be specific to the applying entity. They can't be corporate measures or things of that nature, because it's very hard for examiners to be able to evaluate what those are going to look like after they are able to evaluate them. They can't tell how those are specific to the applying entity if they're corporate measures. So everything must be specific to that applying entity. So when Brittany talks about these measures in a little bit, if you're thinking about applying, think about, how do we measure that within our organization to be able to do that. So impact on the bottom line. And this is part of why 3 years is really important, right, for that transformational journey, because those metrics should be able to show that we have impacted and influenced our financials on the bottom line. So at least 3 years of that transformational data, but we'll be looking for impact to financial results. You have to have a applying entity that it's feasible to be able to assess. So let me give you an example of that. If an organization is too large, too many moving parts, we may need to break that up into smaller pieces of an entity. A good example of that is a large hospital. A large hospital would take absolutely too many examiners to get in to talk to as many people as they would need to be able to assess that type of entity. So we would break that up and we would talk about that during this process, how we would do that, what that would look like for you to be able to challenge. Finally, the examiners need to be able to have access. And so access means they have to be able to go into each part of the applying entity, talk with folks at every level in the organization, from leadership down to the team members. Most of the conversations that they're going to have are with team members. That's who most of the folks are within most organizations, team members, and that's where they'll be getting their data points and doing the most of their interviews and that in the place usually where they're doing their work. And finally, participation in Insight. Some may have heard about Shingo Insight. It's a cultural assessment survey that's given. We give that as part of the challenge process. So an organization would have to be open to taking that assessment survey and being able to look at that beforehand. Now, this is an important consideration, right? Many organizations are using Shingo Insight as a benchmark currently to kind of begin and see where they're at. You can take this as soon as you'd like to, but we keep it at 1 year, so we keep it valid for 1 year. So if you've had it maybe a year and a half or 2 years prior, we will do another survey before, as part of the challenging process. So keep some of those in mind. Now that we've covered quite a bit there, and I know it's been pretty fast as we walk through that. That's why we want to have some questions afterwards. But also remember that you can always talk about your specific situation with Brittany and I. We have an eligibility committee that's made up of part of our board members and some senior examiners. And we want to make sure that we take everything into consideration to make it the best challenge possible for you. Because in the end, it's really about getting the feedback that you need to be able to move forward, move your transformation forward. That's what we're most interested in, and we don't want any distractions as we move along that path.
All right. So, like Shaun said, if you have any questions and we don't get to them today, just make sure that you reach out to us, because we know that we're moving through a lot of information in a small amount of time, which leads us to going over to the results documentation. So as we go through this, it's important to understand what its purpose and the expectations are for this submission. So first, this documentation plays a critical role in determining your eligibility, as Shaun kind of went over, and supporting the overall assessment as it's going to be going to the examiners. This is not just a formality, it's the foundation for demonstrating the impact of integrity of your work. The documentation should be specific to the implying entity, as number 8 that Shaun just went over. We need to, if you're part of a larger organization, it's not the results for the entire organization. It's just that specific applying entity. And it must cover a minimum of 3 years, broke down into monthly or quarterly if possible. So that gives us a strong window into the performance over time. If you have more than 3 years, please add those on, because it tells a better story if you have more than 3 years to show that improvement. So one thing that I want you to remember is these results need to be submitted with your application. So they will come in with your application as long as a profile sheet and your organizational chart. But after Insight, you'll make any updates that are needed, and you'll integrate those into your official achievement report that will be sent to the examiners for the assessment. So this slide shows the outline of how to arrange your results documentation. This is across the 6 key categories, which is safety, environment, morale, financial and productivity, delivery, quality, and customer satisfaction. So you can find these in the guidelines. They're towards the back. And it just shows strongly recommended measures to include in your results documentation. Now, we understand that these may not all apply to you. So we just ask that you look at both sides of those charts and see which ones that you do use, because we don't want you making up metrics to put in there. These are going to be a part of the assessment. So each section should be clearly reflect your year after year trends and tell the story behind the numbers. You need to structure your data in a way to make it easy for examiners to understand your performance and the impact. This slide shows us the elements of building a strong results documentation. So on this one, we're using the first pass yield graph. But you need to just make sure that your data is effective, accessible, and that you focus on clarity and consistency. So just make sure that you use a clear title, a legible graph sizing, the annotations that explain the major spikes and drops. So all those deviations need to be explained. And then be sure to include a target line and a target trend. Clearly show the direction of improvement. That's a big one that we see or we don't see that is nice to have on there, so you can clearly see that improvement. And then add a legend so we know what is what. There's a lot of times that graphs come over and we're not quite sure what things are. So to include a legend so we can interpret that and know what it is. The goal in creating this is to create a documentation that speaks for itself. It's accurate, it's visual, it's clean, and meaning to both you internally and also to the Shingo examiners when they are ready to examine and do that assessment. Shaun, do you have anything to add about this?
This is commonly what organizations tell us is a really great exercise for them, actually, is knowing that somebody is going to be looking at your metrics that has very little knowledge of your organization as a whole, other than what you've currently provided in a profile sheet, and in explaining these measures. So organizations tell us that this is really a good exercise for them to go through because they have to document all of this, right? What does this measure do for us? What systems are driving this measure? What's on the x-axis and the y-axis? How do we understand it? How do we use it in our organization? And what does that look like? So as you look across these, hopefully that provides you some good insight as you're preparing them. It's one of the most valuable things that we've found with the application packet as a whole, but in this part specifically. So,
and we will work with you after you send in your application with the results. We do not assess them, but we review them to make sure that there is everything on there that the examiners will need. And if we have some advice to you, we'll send it back to you and just say, hey, we have this advice, and you are welcome to send new ones before we go over your eligibility meeting.
That's a good point, Britt. As we're looking at those, Brittany and I will go through them. We will get with you, usually on a call. We'll have a Zoom call or a Teams call, and we'll walk through these and we'll talk about specific things that examiners might want to see and look at as they walk through the measures and really try to evaluate how the transformation in an organization has been progressing, what it looks like from a metrics perspective, right? So, and part of the way they look at that is through this result assessment scale. So as we look at the result assessment scale, they're gonna look at stability of those metrics, right? So that's part of the reason that, as Brittany said, we want it monthly and at least by quarter in most cases, right? Where that makes sense. Now, I'll give you an example of one that doesn't go that way, and that's usually the recordables for injuries and stuff that we turn in. That's usually an annual number. But near misses, on the other hand, is not. That's usually a monthly one, right? So as you look at each one of these metrics, stability, right? They're looking for stability. Do we still have the measure kind of going up and down in large increments, right? Because that would signify that it's probably not stable at this point. It's at a different level within the transformation than maybe some of the other measures, right? They're looking at trend and level as they're looking at that stability, right? This is why it's really important that the axes are properly scaled and that they know what that scale is so that they can see the trend and level on it. What does that look like? Now, I know there's going to be some cases in organizations where they look at the measures and they say, well, we can't really release the measure that we'd like to release because it's confidential. Get with Brittany and I. Let's talk about that. There's ways to look at those measures where I'm sure we can make you feel comfortable. We've been doing this for years across many organizations, and we're usually able to come up with something that will work for you so that you don't feel that you're releasing confidential information. We don't want confidential information. We want information that people can look at, begin to look at the trends and levels, the stability, the alignment. How does it align to the organizational goals and objectives? And how do we use those measures to improve? So as you're thinking about that documentation of those measures, how are we using those? Are we setting different goals? When do we set those goals? What does that look like as we move along our transformation and our improvement efforts? So keep those in mind as you're doing it. Again, everything that we've presented to you today in one form or another is in those assessment guidelines. Read those carefully, go through them, all of the scoring, all of the scales, all of the examples that we've given are in there. And then get with us, and we're happy to elaborate or walk through any thing that you think is a concern for you. That's what we're here to do, and we're more than happy to do that just as many times as you'd like to. So look forward to talking to you soon about any of these questions that you have. And we've got a little bit of time, I think, for some Q&A, Brett.
As we wrap up, we just want to thank you for your time and engagement today. And we just want to remind you that the bronze medallion, the silver medallion, and the Shingo Prize represent more than just recognition. They reflect a deep commitment to continuous improvement, excellence, and respect for people. So now we'll go ahead and turn the time over to ask your questions if you had any. I saw some things come up on the chat, but I'll turn that time over to Mary for that.
Thanks, Britt. Thanks, Shaun. That was a great overview of the process. If you do have any questions, you can add them in the chat or you can add them to the Q&A. I'm looking at both of them, and we'll just wait for a couple of minutes here and see if there's any questions that we can answer.
Remember, as you're going through this, do not hesitate to call us early. If you're thinking 2-3 years out, if it happens, it happens. If it gets postponed, it gets postponed. Lots of things happen within 2 or 3 years. but we can at least begin that conversation, and help you through that. And it benefits you in so many ways to go through this process.
I know a common question that comes up is, should you wait until you think you're ready for the Shingo Prize?
Yeah, never, never, never wait. The feedback alone is so valuable. And as we talk, Britt and I both can tell you about, how to go through that process and how it can help you as you prepare. But no, why wait? Feedback comes at all different times when we need it. And if we wait, sometimes we never feel like we're going to get there. Remember that we're changing things here too. We're working on things all the time to improve this process. So things will change as we move along this path, not only from the Shingo Institute's perspective and what we do here, but also from yours. The world changes quickly nowadays. So I would say never wait. It's about feedback. It's about moving forward. It's about getting that feedback that we need to get faster on our journey and get the better results and culture that we want within our journey.
And that's another question we get, is about re-challenging. Can we re-challenge? Yes, you can re-challenge. And there is parts in our guidelines about re-challenging. So we encourage you to look at those guidelines.
So,
Absolutely.
so, so Dan has a question here about Beyond the Prize, um, and happy to answer that. We are working on the criteria for that right now, as we speak. Britt and I have been working with, not only board members but with our executive examiner committee, and coming up with the criteria for the Beyond the Prize. So we will be announcing that when we feel good about where that criteria is at, but that is coming. Like Dan points out here, we're changing things here as well. So we'll have several new things coming up, and it's exciting to be working on those.
There are a couple other questions in the chat too. One of them, Sergio asked, in your experience, what is the effort and time to prepare an achievement report?
Yeah, this is different for all the different applicants. It does take a lot of time. It is a 50-page report, and graphics can be included in there. But we do want you to look at the specific applying entity. I think that's one huge thing. And tell us your improvements. Give us a background. Tell us a story. We want the examiners to be able to see that progression and see that improvement. So as far as time, this can take months for
That's right.
organizations to go through and write this achievement report. So one thing about the achievement report is that gets submitted after Insight. So we have the application, the results, the profile sheet that get submitted right up front. And then you'll go through Insight. And then when you get the Insight report, we want you to look at those findings. We want you to look at those opportunities, those strengths, and we want you to include them in your achievement report. So that achievement report won't be complete until after you've gone through Insight and included some of that in there, but it will take months.
Yeah, and like I said just a minute ago, Britt and I are working on, along with some of this, our examiner committee as well, as a more simplified way for you to do it. But what we want to make sure is that it's providing you the value of creating that report too. So we're taking both of those into consideration as we're preparing some of the process to make it more simplified and still provide you that. I wanted to get to this question because this is an important one. It said, are positive results for each company published online? We don't publish anything without the organization's permission. So the only thing that we publish online for an organization is what's called a profile sheet. which the organization provides for us. And there are some results in there in all the categories that we talked about that Brittany brought up, from cost to productivity, all of these things. But it's in what's called a profile sheet. So if you go online and you click on a recipient, it'll bring up a profile sheet. That is something that they have provided for us to be able to publish. Other than that, we don't publish anything. We feel that's a very important part of what we do is keeping everything confidential that the organization wants. And other than that, but
And we're
there
very
is
excited.
information out there.
We're very excited because we're updating our website right now. So pretty soon, in the very near future, we're going to be able to present a very well laid out format for our recipients that show their logo, and it'll be great. We're super excited to be able to promote them that way.
The other thing that we do share is when a company receives an award, then they prepare a video that talks about their accomplishment. And so we share that on our YouTube site. So if you're interested in seeing any of those, you can go to our YouTube channel to watch those. There is
Good point, Mary.
Yeah,
Thanks.
there is another question about the recording today. This is being recorded, and I'll send that out to everybody probably within the next couple of days, and so you'll have it to refer to. And it's also on our YouTube channel. There's lots and lots of content on YouTube. If you're interested, just go and check that out as well. Andy also asks if there was a cost involved in having a call with Brittany and Shaun, and there is no charge for that. They are available when you guys can set up a time to chat, and they'll be happy to answer any question that you have.
Yeah, we're happy to talk to you. We look forward to talking to many, many of you soon. Even like I said, even if it's years and years out, we're happy to talk with you. So get a hold of one of us. We'll set it up.
All right, well, that's all the questions that we have, and we're out of time today. So thanks everyone for joining, and thanks to Britt and Shaun. I appreciate your time today, and we'll see everyone again next month.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone.